Good morning, everyone. It's a great honour to open the conference today, and I look forward to spending 2 or 3 days with lots of like-minded colleagues looking at all aspects of drug delivery and formulation science. So today what I was going to do is just talk you through general trends in the industry as I see them, or general trends within Pfizer as I see the work we're working on them. In the first half of the talk, then the second half of the talk, I'd like to talk a little bit more about some of the solutions we're working on around the technologies we're working on, and finally finish up on the sort of workforce of the future to support the trends. What sort of people do we need in our industry moving forward? So I just put up this just to show the general trends in filings, and you can see we're pretty steady, and 25% large molecules, 75% small molecules. I'm a small molecules guy. I lead the small molecules formulation design group, and that's 3/4 of what we do. But really, it's not so much about the numbers these days. I think it's more about the strategy we're taking in getting drugs to the market and to the patients. And this is just a review from the FDA last year about the type of products and type of development paths they're working on. As you can see on the left-hand side, lots of drugs are coming forward with accelerated breakthrough status, alternative ways of getting your drugs to patients fast if you've got a genuine differentiator, a genuine medical need you're addressing in your products. On the right-hand side, you can see things like orphan drug status, special patient needs are becoming more important as well for us in our filing strategy. That leads to about 80% of all new drug filings are actually taking place in the US. So US is, with its innovative strategy, supporting, enabling us getting there fast, is driving this sort of more creative, more innovative approach to getting drugs on the market faster. That changes the paradigm for how we develop drugs, though. On the top here, you have what you would call a traditional development path, where it's taking from candidate selection to get into the market. It's taking the order of 10 to 15 years, depending on how far back you go, driven by lots of different factors. Xalkori was a breakthrough therapy for cancer, and we managed to get that to the market in just under 8 years from candidate selection to launch. This was quite a while ago now. That was one of the first breakthrough therapies. And that was a change in paradigm for us then. We had to work very hard to compress those timelines down. As you can see, you're sort of selecting your doses, your clinical product, more or less straight after phase 1. Ibrance, palbociclib, a treatment for breast cancer, we got it in just under 5 years as well. So that changed it again. So what we're seeing each time we're going around this cycle of acceleration, breakthrough therapy status, we're changing the paradigm in how we develop our drugs. Now that's putting a lot of stress, a lot of creativity, a lot of science and innovation on how you do the development program moving forward. So we've done some analysis, or just resource analysis. This is just pharmaceutical sciences resource analysis about how much effort does it take to go an accelerated program versus a traditional standard program. So the blue line on the screen is just the standard development program, where you see a traditional ramping up of development activities as you get closer and closer to filing, as you're getting closer and closer to commercial launch. The green line is actual the palbociclib data from the accelerated filing, and you see this bimodal distribution. So the overall resource deployed is about the same, but it's being spread over different periods of the development path. So you tend to have a big bolus to get the candidate to market. You're then constantly working on the candidate. You have commitments, phase 3 commitments, formalization optimization still carries on, manufacturing optimization still carries on, the synthetic development still carries on afterwards, and then you're also supporting filing around the world. So the overall resource balance is about the same, but what we've seen, the big trend for us now is we've seen a shift in a significant amount of work needs to be done earlier in development. Now that tends to be on the other side of the attrition curve. So overall it may be the same, but if your attrition adjusts this and assumes some of those investments won't deliver, it does actually make it quite a resource-intensive way of working. So this is one of the challenges for us now moving forward. Most drugs we're working on are following this path line, so it's changing our technology strategy, our approach to development to basically support this new paradigm. So the second change we're seeing, especially, it's maybe a Pfizer-specific one, but it's a very complicated graph. This is Leeson papers from 2007. It's still fair and true if you look at the data. The trends in there still reflect what we're working on, certainly within the Pfizer space. I don't know if some of the other companies it's shifting the space or dynamics a little bit more. But if you just pick to one class, if you pick to one class of drugs like the kinase inhibitors down here, a major part of our portfolio are kinase inhibitors. And we're actually going down a route of low molecular weight, low log D kinase inhibitors. So they are drug-like molecules in one sense. What we're finding more and more is having knock-on ramification implications for the pharmacokinetics. So we're seeing a wave of more diverse products needed early in development to support variable PK/PD relationships. So that in a formulation sense, that means more modified release and more dose setting versus IR and modified release in early development we're seeing to support this shift in the portfolio. That's then compounded by the target space. So Pfizer are a big play in JAK kinase inhibitor franchise, looking at all forms of inflammatory disorders. So over here we have Xeljanz on the market as an IR and a modified release product. And I think, if I was reading my news correctly, I think we got approval for ulcerative colitis last week, or this week even as well. So you have, this is what it's looking like now. You have a kinase inhibitor, multiple indications, multiple formulations needed to support its development. Make sure you're giving your patients the best spectrum of activity you can get from that class of drugs. But as you can see here, as you go across, we have a range of kinase inhibitors looking at different spectrums of inflammatory activity, and we're seeing a whole spectrum of different clinical indications. All of this needs understanding in early development. You have a range of potential clinical indications and a range of formulation types needed to support that. And this is what it means. On this graph here, these are the first in human formulation approaches we use with time. Historically, Pfizer really have gone for speed and low resource to phase 1. That's been our drive. Get there quick, understand the clinical, the drug in the clinic. Then once you understand the drug in the clinic, figure out where you want to go next into phase 1 and phase 2. So we tended to start with solution formulations in phase 1, of single dose escalation, even multi-dose. What we're seeing now, though, is a much wider variety of formulations needed in phase 1. Suspensions, potential IVs to understand some of these complicated PK/PD relationships, more modified release approaches, and you need more dose flexibility to understand what's going on. As you saw on the JAK kinase franchise, a lot of topical products as well, so you're having to do this for oral and topical. So this is the trend we're seeing, and I've just given you an example from the inflammatory JAK kinase area, but we're also seeing it to some degree in oncology and some degree in some of our metabolic diseases as well now. It's not just early development, also in full development, later stage. Typically now, for every one candidate in full development, we have 2 formulation options being developed in parallel. It used to be one, and you would then follow up with other products with time. That's being driven by a number of things. We have these more clinical options. Frankly, there's more opportunity space. There's more patients you can be treated with different approaches. Our increase in pediatric demands is a big change for us now. Every candidate going into phase 3 now, we're starting work earlier and earlier to develop a pediatric formulation option as well, and we're co-developing our primary filing and our pediatric formulation in parallel more and more these days. And finally, acceleration is driving more formulation options. Sometimes that very first oncology formulation you get out there in that record-breaking time may not be the perfect product for the longer term. And so we're actually seeing an opportunity now to actually redevelop formulations with time as we're moving on. So again, it's a change in paradigm, basically the same number of candidates but more formulations in both the early space and the late space. In terms of chemical space, like I say, molecular weight, log D, the traditional formulation design characteristics, things we worry about, are not changing too much. We're still very much a small molecule drug company with traditional drug-like properties. What we are seeing is a changing chemical complexity and synthetic complexity as well. So on this graph here, you can see a number of chiral candidates are trending upwards, fluorinated compounds trending upwards, and also the number of complicated ring structures trending upwards. So that per se is not really, on an individual case, is not really a technology challenge, but it's making it more resource intensive. You're having to go to more specialist suppliers, specialist CMOs to help you with this. We're seeing it, you'll see on the next slide as well, some of these are much harder to crystallize, so understanding your solid form landscape is more complicated with these candidates. From a formulation design scientist, I do need the right material and significant amounts of it early to develop my formulations. And at the early stages of development, that's when the synthetic chemists, the process chemists, are trying to resolve these issues. So quite often we find the demand to supply these new formulation options, develop these new formulation options, is putting a lot of strain on our development chemists as well. The next trend really we've seen, like I say, molecular weight's holding good, is we're seeing a drift to basic compounds with lower log Ps, lower pKa's. And that's putting a stress on our ability to find salt options to give us the diversity of properties we need to support either manufacturing, biopharmaceutics, or stability issues. So more and more, if you see down here, the dark blue is the number of free forms being developed. And you can see this trend. We had more diversity in our salt form, hydrate landscape, whereas now we're seeing mainly a lot of weak, free, basic molecules as our preferred form. Again, it's cramping our space. It's limiting our flexibility, our design space somewhat moving forward. So they're really the trends we're seeing in the molecular space. So overall, as I sit here now thinking about what worries us, what are we worried about for the next 4 or 5 years, I think acceleration is becoming the norm. If it's not an accelerated oncology, we're seeing stop-start development programs. Programs will start, you're waiting for more clinical data, the clinical data is positive, it then moves very quickly again. So speed and different resourcing strategies are one trend. More diverse drug products per candidate. And like I say, as a formulation scientist, I find this quite exciting, but with the same number of people and the same amount of money, having to do as many formulations is a challenge for us. And the third area really is synthetic complexity is shifting. We do need API, we do need to support our chemists as they're developing the process at the same time. So how are we going to respond to that? What are we going to do? And really what I was going to just talk through some of the areas that some of the areas we're investing into to position ourselves to cope with this trend. We're halfway through that process at the moment and making sure come 2020 we're much better positioned to support these needs moving forward. So I'll talk about our technology strategy, our predictive sciences strategy. I'll then go on our mindset now around thinking about commercial manufacture from the get-go and designing for commercial manufacture from the start. So how can we enable that? It's easy to want to do, but how do you do it? Then lastly, talk about the changing nature of our workforce we've seen move in the last couple of years. So this is our technology strategy at a very high level. You've got 4 components to it. We've got over here a stream around flexible, adaptable synthesis, a lot of flow chemistry, flow crystallization strategies are going on to support that over this side. Down here, we were investing heavily in multi-particulate platforms. They give us that dose flexibility we want, from IR to modified release to taste masking for pediatrics. So we have a big investment strategy in multi-particulates as a platform technology to support this moving forward. Then a lot of work on predictive design and computational predictive methods. And finally, our drug product manufacturing, which is, as you heard, is moving towards a more continuous approach moving forward. So I'm going to talk about examples from these 2 sectors here, just for the remainder of the talk. But before I move on, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the scientific data cloud. As an industry, I say it as an industry, certainly within Pfizer it's true, I think it's true speaking to colleagues in other companies, is we're not very good at connecting data up. We have lots of analytical instruments as standalone ways of measuring and storing data. We have a lot of manufacturing data in our clinical manufacturing groups or our commercial manufacturing groups. It's very hard to pull all that together. We have a lot of bespoke solutions, collecting data, then utilizing data. And if we're really going to deliver that modeling dream, we need to find a solution to that to make data freely accessible to the scientists, predictive scientists, and see a virtuous circle of measure, predict, learn, improve. And so really resolving how we store data, how we make it accessible is a key strategic intent for us at Pfizer, and there's a big initiative for us trying to pull that together. But as anyone who's worked in this field knows, this is not straightforward with the diversity of data sources and the diversity of modeling solutions you need to move forward. But this is one of our fundamental anchors in our technology strategies to make this data available to drive the modeling strategy moving forward. So I've got some examples now of just where we've applied our modeling approaches to help de-risk, focus experiments, speed up development, reduce the resources required for development. This is in the crystal prediction field. We've actually been doing this for many, many years actually now. This is a very mature area working with the Cambridge group. And what we do really is we use a crystal structure prediction, a process where we look at all the different orientations, all the configurations of the unit cell, and look at the energy and energy densities of that material. And we can then compare that with what we actually measure. So over here we've got a couple of polymorphs, one up here, one down here. And what we're doing is we're matching the known polymorph state with the computational predictive state, and basically low energy is good. That allows us to very quickly isolate what we think is going to be the most stable form. So small amount of screening, small amount of identification of the form, and combined with the computational approaches, you can then have great confidence you have the most stable, commercially viable form a lot earlier in development. And you can then focus all your experiments on understanding that form a lot quicker, a lot faster, with greater confidence. In addition to this, we do a whole variety of computational approaches. This is a very mature area. If you move over to some of the areas we're spending more time is looking actually modelling our manufacturing process. This was an accelerated candidate. This is actually powder cyclic data, actually, and you're going very fast into your commercial facilities. This is a lubricated powder filled into a capsule, and what we noticed very late in the day, and for an accelerated filing, new findings very late in the day is a very nervous time, very hard. So what we have here is a couple of batches where at the end of the run, this is the run down here in kilos throughput through the capsule filling machine, we're seeing a suppression in dissolution at the end of the run. So I think this is a percent dissolve in a period of time. So we discovered this very late on. We weren't really sure what was happening. We thought we actually had a well-controlled, well-understood process, and something was clearly happening here that we hadn't anticipated. So what we did is we actually set up a model, and it was all around the hopper feeding system to the capsule filling machine. And we modelled it in a DEM model approach. And what we found was it was basically over-mixing. The powder was staying in that hopper and being mixed very, very aggressively for a prolonged period of time. And it turned out during manufacturing we were just basically over-lubricating our powder, which then led to the dissolution. So traditionally, we would have sat down with our hopper designers, made some rigs, done some development runs, wasted lots of material trying to understand how we fix that issue. And we'd have done a set of experiments around this process here. That would have taken too long, and it would have taken too much precious API at that stage of the business. So we modelled it, and we worked with the hopper designers, and we came up with a solution here with some subtle changes. It's less full, we have a different mixing rod at the end, and the auger is actually pulling the powder more consistently, and that actually fixed the issue. First time round we run that approach with a clinical batch, actually it worked, and we resolved the suppression in dissolution. Historically, what we would have probably done is just cut the batch. We'd have gone for an approach where we just dropped the last sort of quarter of the batch, something like that. So you can see this modelling approach is helping us understand these manufacturing issues a lot quicker, a lot more efficient, and that's actually then being used further on to further develop the process of manufacturing powder cyclid at our Freiburg facility now. Another example really is in biopharm. We have biopharm's a tricky area. We've been strong supporters of the Orbito initiative in Europe, trying to connect our in vitro data, our predictive sciences, and trying to resolve this area and be much better at predicting bioperformance. It's a very, very tough area. This is an area where I think we're still in the blend of experimental, predictive, and clinical data needing to be brought together to learn and develop your models as such. Again, this is an accelerated candidate where at the point we were accelerating it into those pivotal registration studies, we changed the form and we changed the formulation, which then gives us a lot of confidence. We've got to build lots of confidence around, are we going to see a bioperformance issue? We'd actually committed to the registration study, and we're now trying to optimize our formulation. If you get that wrong, you basically can undermine the study's principles and your whole filing strategy. So again, to support that and make sure we had the confidence that we could manage a form and formulation split mid that key registration study, we did a lot of work de-risking the studies. A lot of in silico work, a lot of work in dissolution tests, a whole variety of non-standard dissolution tests. Specifically using the TNO system we found to be very useful in building our own internal confidence. And then when we got to the clinic eventually, we saw a whole range of different products, a whole family were totally bioequivalent, and we managed that risk very effectively. So that's really just the section we have on just the modelling approaches. Now, the middle section really is how do we connect better with our commercial guys? How are we designing formulations from very early in development for those commercial needs? Because again, in a traditional development program, you had plenty of time during phase 3 and during sort of technology transfer to the commercial division to resolve lots of things. We can't do that now. We're having to go straight to our commercial facilities a lot earlier and give them the confidence that the products they're having are robust and reliable. This is probably how we were set up as a company. Pfizer's grown for acquisition over the last 10 years, so we have a right collection of different manufacturing facilities all over the world, a whole bunch of different relationships between the API guys, the drug product guys, and we manage a quite complex supply chain of making the API, developing the drug products, and then commercially supplying the drug product. It'd be much better if we streamlined that for these accelerated candidates. So we may have a development center, we have a commercial manufacturing center. It doesn't just stop there, we then got to manage the product during its life. And our strategy working with our commercial guys is to streamline our manufacturing design process, our clinical manufacturing process, and our commercial manufacturing process to allow us to move things around the world far more effectively and efficiently in the future. So how are we going to do this? This is just a schematic of a traditional roller compacted tablet type product, and you get a sense of the scale of the facilities. It tends to be over 3 stories to move bulk amounts of powder and very large, almost ton volumes of powder around. You have a number of unit processes. Each one of those tends to have a start to finish, some form of control process check before you go on to the next one. So typically to run a large volume tablet press, a tablet line, at about 300 to 500,000 tablets an hour. This is what the typical setup you'll see. So it's industrialized. It's built around volume efficiency, which is then very hard to bring in small volume new products where you're still learning the manufacturing process as well as making clinical supplies, potentially even making commercial supplies to some degree. So this is what it typically looks like. An early phase 1, phase 2 study, you'll be making a batch of about 10 kilos, maybe a few thousand tablets to get that study going. Then you scale it up. You then learn how to go to the next set of kit that's the next size up, and you may be making 100,000 tablets. And then when you go to commercial, you've got the same again. You have to scale up to those very large blender volumes, much higher tablet presses, and you're making millions of tablets potentially. If we can move to a continuous process, we can use one set of equipment and we then can scale out. So to do the early clinical batches, you can just run it for a few hours. For phase 3 supplies or your launch supplies, you maybe can run it for maybe half a day. And when you're into commercial volumes, you can run this more or less for a whole day. And that will then give you that flexibility in scale to drive the process forward. So this is where we currently are. This is our Groton facility. This is the first equipment to install this continuous manufacturing line. So over here you have, it's 2 halves. This is a wet granulation side. This is a tableting side. The powders are all over here. So it's powders in the top, wet granulated, more powders mixing, and then tablets. Or you can run it as a direct compression line as we're currently doing at the moment. So the excipients, drug API in the top, a mixing unit straight into a tablet press. Interestingly, in our Groton site on the East Coast, we actually built the unit in a warehouse. We didn't actually install it into our GMP facilities. We built it in a modular approach, just in some grey space and sites. So we had a very flexible, adaptable GMP space as well. The next stage really is at Sandwich site, where I'm based, and this is the machine. We had a development version of this installed end of last year. This is Michael Dolson, our head of worldwide research, opening the facilities with us end of last year. Very proud moment for the site to get him supporting the manufacturing sciences in such a way. And then finally, really, this is in Freiburg, or our commercial manufacturing facility. They've just finished building this unit here, and we're actually, in the second half of the year, we'll be installing the commercial version of this. So if you think about that picture of the globe I had now, we have development sites and clinical manufacturing sites at Sandwich on the East Coast, Sandwich in the UK, and Groton on the East Coast, and we have a commercial facility in Freiburg in Germany. That's now how we're going to manage this accelerated designing for commercial from the get-go, from the start. So just to run through the benefits, in terms of development benefits, continuous manufacturing actually gives you the ability to understand lots of process variables very quickly. You can just alter your mixing conditions, your tablet press conditions, and you can understand the design space very, very quickly. Reducing the amount of tech transfer and reducing the risk through reducing the amount of time it takes to do tech transfer and scale up, and also reducing the risk. For commercial, really, is again that reduction in risk when we're taking it to the commercial facilities first time. More importantly, it gives them flexibility in batch sizes. Commercial volumes are traditionally quite hard to predict, and you need some flexibility and adaptability in your commercial volumes as well. So it will help them with their approach. The next thing really we've got to worry about is how to do this. So this is traditionally all the things you would worry about when you're designing a tablet. So over the right-hand side, you have all your ingoing properties. Over the left-hand side, ingoing properties. Right-hand side, you've got your desired critical attributes for that tablet, how you want that tablet to perform. Then in the middle, you've got a whole bunch of things you're having to manage and understand in development. And this is what development scientists do. They understand all this to make sure you've got this right for a robust product that will give the patient it needs. What we're seeing, though, with continuous manufacturing is a lot more work needs to be understood in this middle ground here. A lot more understanding of the mixing technology and the tablet manufacturing technology needs to be pulled together. But fortunately, you can do that. You can measure lots of things. With our current setup, I think we've got about 22 live data streams coming off the continuous manufacturing rig at the moment, all producing data. All that is valuable knowledge you can use for the system to control itself and give you high-quality drug products coming out the other end. The problem is, how do you do that? We've probably not got the intelligence, the understanding, the ability to connect all these factors as we sit here now. So what actually happens is, the development scientists can understand what you need going in. We've got a mixing technology and a tablet manufacturing technology and direct compression line, two systems. We have a lot of process analytical controls built into the system to manage it. And then we've got all the testing. We need to pull that together to successfully make a product. This is the sort of data streams you're getting coming out of the system now, and this is how we're managing it. So it's still very much a development setup. And we have a team of people sitting there with their iPads, monitoring this stuff, looking through into the manufacturing suite. Now, that's clearly not a viable process. We need to move that on. So this is Clements, our head of manufacturing at Freiburg. He has very clear views on what he's going to need to make this work. He can't sit there with a team of highly trained engineers and process modelers running his systems for him. So we need to come up with a solution with time to allow us to utilize that data more effectively. This is where we're going next, really. So this is the apparatus. So we've got the sensing technologies already in there. We know we can measure lots of things, and we're starting to think about how we can use cognitive manufacturing systems to pull that data together and to understand how the system can run itself and control itself. So a lot of work we're doing now with our commercial colleagues to try and understand what sort of an artificial intelligence-led approach will be to data mining that data and controlling the process moving forward. So finally, to talk a little bit about the technology needs and the manufacturing needs, what we're actually seeing is a change in workforce need as well. We've spent a lot of time understanding where we are with our workforce. So you can see here predictive sciences, manufacturing sciences, understanding the patient experience is another area we mustn't forget. A lot of formulation platforms, and finally, a lot of work is being done in the external world now. So this is how we sat down about 5 years ago and said, what do we need for this workforce of the future? We probably focus more on the traditional formulation sciences, maybe the biopharmaceutic sciences, and we had to look again and think about what do we need to support this vision moving forward. And this is just a breakdown of the new starters in my group over the last 5 years. So if you look at the first degree, you've got a lot of diversity in here. I'd say traditionally we're more the schools of pharmacy and chemistry were the traditional supply. If I think back to when I first started in my career, the people who were around me at the time. We have a lot more diversity, though. We have electronics even, we have physical sciences, and we have the engineering skill set predominant in our first degree skill set. If you come over to the postgrad PhD level, again, we're seeing a big shift in here. I'd say a lot more engineers and a lot more modelers and chemists coming into the group now. Again, this has traditionally been led by the schools of pharmaceutical science background, maybe a chemistry background. Interestingly, when you look down, all the people that started in recent times, a third of the postdocs were hired specifically for the computational predictive sciences ability. And that was a very focused intent on our purpose to go and build that skill set. I would say the engineering skill set, the mechanical engineering, process engineering skill set, and the modelling skill set is where we've really tipped the bias in our workforce over the last 5 years. If you look at the level as well, in terms of who we hire internally, you see quite a marked shift in the people coming with graduate qualifications versus postgraduate qualifications. We're internalising, focusing on the high skill, the directing, controlling influencing skill set. And we're taking a different view on how we get data now. Maybe data is how you source data, how you get data. We can use a lot of CROs. We can outsource the data. We can use lots of different ways of getting data these days. So internally, we're focusing more on a slightly higher end skill set to drive this strategy moving forward. So looking forward, how do we see this panning out? Well, like I say, I think the drug delivery scientist and patient focus is probably an area we need to do a little bit more on. As we shifted towards the modeling engineering skill set, I can see it in the language of the department, the way people are speaking. I think they do need to get back to the basic, as you said, pharmacy skills of what does the patient need. My job is to make a product that's suitable for patients. So I think we've got to tip the balance a little bit more that way. When we say predictive sciences, that is a very big, complicated area. It's a bit like saying an engineer. It's a very big, complicated area. And as you heard in the introduction piece, a lot more work now on multi-scale modeling. How can we link models? How can we go from an atomistics to an engineering model? Quite a big series of jumps in either scale, in either distance or time we need to factor in there. And again, managing big data is a big area for us. We have the data. It's just in a variety of different sources, and we have the ability to utilize the data. I'd like to say, finally, the process engineering skill set in terms of supporting our advanced manufacturing needs moving forward. So really, just in conclusion, what I've hopefully set out for you is some of the challenges we're seeing around accelerated development, more diversity in drug products, more complexity in the synthetic routes needed, limited space in solid form landscapes. So what are we doing about that? And I've just given you some highlights from our technology strategy around predictive sciences. We're fully embracing continuous manufacturing as our preferred route for most oral products. We have our first product to be launched out of a continuous manufacturing process end of this year, second product behind, and about 3 or 4 more in the pipeline behind it. And the last thing really is think about the workforce needs. The workforce needs going forward are very different to the workforce needs we need 10 years ago, so actively working on that. There's an element of you can hire the right people, but you also need to retrain and retool and help the existing workforce embrace and embed some of these new techniques as well. And with that, I shall finish. Thank you.